The Galactic Sovereignty Council chamber floated in the void between star systems, a massive ring-shaped station where 63 member species gathered to maintain peace across known space. Today, that peace hung by a thread. Ambassador Theron of the Kelverix Confederation stood at the central podium, his 4 arms trembling despite his best efforts to remain composed. The Kelverix were known across the galaxy as master diplomats, beings who could negotiate peace between the most hostile civilizations. But today, Theron looked like someone who had glimpsed the end of everything. Honored delegates, Theron began, his translator converting his harmonic speech into frequencies every species could understand. I come before you with an urgent petition. We must establish a quarantine zone around Sector 447, specifically around the star system the inhabitants call Sol. Murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. Quarantine zones were rare, reserved for dangerous phenomena like collapsing stars or quantum anomalies. High Chancellor Vorn of the Vrexian Dominion rose from his seat. The Vrexians were an imposing species, standing nearly 3 meters tall with crystalline exoskeletons that refracted light into rainbow patterns. They controlled 73 star systems through a combination of economic dominance and military might. War was beneath them now, they simply bought what they wanted. Ambassador Theron, Vorn's voice resonated like struck glass. Sector 447 contains nothing of value. A few primitive species, barely achieving fusion power. Why would we waste resources on a quarantine? Theron's bioluminescent skin patterns shifted to colors that signaled extreme distress. Because, High Chancellor, one of those primitive species calls themselves humans, and they are the most dangerous beings I have ever encountered. Laughter erupted from several delegations. The Vrexians found the idea particularly amusing. Dangerous? Vorn chuckled, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Theron, your people once declared the Blorgax dangerous, and they turned out to be excellent trade partners. What makes these humans so terrifying? Theron activated his holographic display. The image of a blue-green planet appeared, continents and oceans clearly visible. This is Earth, the human homeworld. Population 12 billion. Technology level approximately 200 standard cycles behind galactic average. No faster-than-light capability yet. No gravitic shielding. No plasma weapons. Then what's the problem? Asked Representative Slicks, a small insectoid being from the Hive Collective. Her thousands of eyes glittered with confusion. The problem, Theron said quietly, is their history. My research team spent 3 standard years studying human civilization before we made first contact. What we found was 10,000 years of uninterrupted warfare. Silence fell over the chamber. Every species has conflict in their past, Vorn said dismissively. It's part of evolution. The strong survive, the weak perish. Then civilization emerges and war becomes obsolete. Not for humans, Theron replied. They never stopped. While we were developing interstellar travel, they were developing weapons. While we were building trade networks, they were building fortifications. They have fought wars with every weapon imaginable, swords, explosives, chemical agents, biological plagues, and atomic fission bombs capable of rendering entire continents uninhabitable. The chamber stirred uneasily. Theron continued, but that's not what frightens me. Many species have destructive capabilities. What makes humans unique is that they've turned warfare into an art form, a science, a fundamental aspect of their culture. He displayed images of human military installations. They have academies dedicated entirely to studying combat. Not just physical training, but strategic thinking, psychological warfare, resource management, technological innovation, all in service of conflict. They write books analyzing battles that happened thousands of years ago. They create simulations of hypothetical wars that have never occurred. They have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. And they mean it literally. More images appeared, massive stockpiles of weapons, underground bunkers, orbital defense platforms under construction. Every human nation, every political entity, maintains a standing military force even in peacetime. They spend trillions of their currency units on weapons research. They test their soldiers constantly, pushing them to extremes that would kill members of most other species. Representative Mora of the Aquarian Syndicate spoke up, her gills fluttering with concern. Surely this is just evolutionary baggage. Once they achieve interstellar travel and join the galactic community, they'll abandon these primitive practices. Theron's skin patterns flashed dark purple, the Kelvaric's equivalent of despair. That's what we thought. That's why we made contact. The holographic display changed to show a recording. A sleek Kelvaric's diplomatic vessel approached Earth, broadcasting peace and friendship on all frequencies. The date stamp showed this was only 2 months ago. We followed every protocol, Theron explained. We announced our presence weeks in advance. We shared technology freely. We offered trade, cultural exchange, membership in the galactic community. The humans welcomed us with open arms. The recording showed crowds of jubilant humans celebrating in massive cities. Fireworks filled the skies. Human leaders gave speeches about a new era of peace and prosperity. They were everything we hoped for, Theron said. Curious, intelligent, eager to learn. We spent 40 days on Earth, and I became convinced that our fears were unfounded. Yes, they had a violent past, but they seemed ready to join civilization. Vorn leaned forward. So what changed? Theron's silence stretched for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I made a mistake. During a state dinner, I asked a human general, a military leader, a simple question. I asked, what would your people do if someone attacked Earth? The display changed to show a recording of the dinner. A human in a decorated uniform sat across from Theron, his face weathered and scarred. The man smiled, a gesture humans used to show friendliness, but there was something unsettling about it. Theron's voice narrated over the recording. The general said, Ambassador, we've been preparing for that possibility for our entire existence as a species. We have contingency plans for invasion, occupation, orbital bombardment, biological warfare, psychological attacks, and scenarios we haven't even told our own citizens about because they're too disturbing. The human general in the recording leaned forward, still smiling. If someone attacks Earth, we won't just defend ourselves. We'll hunt them. We'll find every ship, every base, every world they own. We'll dismantle their civilization piece by piece until nothing remains but wreckage and regret. And then we'll make sure everyone in the galaxy knows exactly what happens when you threaten humanity. The recording paused on the general's face, and every delegate in the council chamber could see it, the absolute certainty in his eyes, the complete lack of doubt or hesitation. That's when I understood, Theron said. Humans aren't violent because they're primitive. They're prepared for violence because they understand it better than anyone else in the galaxy. They've studied it for 10,000 years. They've perfected it. And they're ready to use that knowledge at any moment. High Chancellor Vorn was no longer laughing. You're asking us to quarantine an entire species because they have strong militaries. That's not grounds for isolation. I'm asking you to quarantine them because if anyone provokes them, the resulting conflict will make the sector wars look like a minor disagreement. Theron's desperation was palpable. These beings smile when they talk about destroying their enemies. They teach their children games that simulate warfare. They create entertainment, stories, movies, songs celebrating combat and sacrifice. War isn't something humans do. It's something they are. Representative Thrix of the Mechanical Concordant spoke for the first time, his synthetic voice devoid of emotion. We have analyzed your data, Ambassador. The humans possess no weapons that can threaten the Vrexian Dominion or any major power. Their space forces are minimal. Their ground armies, while numerous, lack advanced technology. Your fear appears to be based on cultural analysis rather than actual threat assessment. That's exactly my point. Theron's skin flashed bright red, extreme agitation. We're evaluating them based on current capability, but humans don't work that way. They adapt. They innovate. They take whatever technology exists and immediately weaponize it. Give them faster-than-light travel, and within a year they'll have FTL missiles. Share gravitic shielding, and they'll figure out how to turn it into a weapon. Every advancement becomes a new way to fight. He displayed more data, graphs showing human technological progress over their recorded history. The curve was exponential, with sharp spikes occurring during major conflicts. Look at these patterns, Theron urged. Humans make their greatest technological leaps during warfare. The pressure of survival drives innovation at incredible rates. In just 40 years during their Second Global War, they went from propeller-driven aircraft to jet engines, from basic radio to computers, from conventional explosives to atomic weapons. War makes them evolve faster. The chamber was silent again, but this time the quiet was thoughtful rather than dismissive. Senator Clix of the United Outer Colonies stood. The Clixians were an ancient species, having survived in space for over 50,000 standard cycles. Ambassador Theron, I've reviewed the cultural data your team collected. The humans have stories, myths, and legends that concern me deeply. They have a concept called mutually assured destruction, the idea that they would rather die fighting than submit to conquest. Is this accurate? Theron nodded. Yes, Senator. In their relatively recent history, 2 human nations possessed enough atomic weapons to destroy all life on their planet multiple times over. They aimed these weapons at each other for decades, fully prepared to end their own species rather than surrender. The conflict eventually ended peacefully, but the willingness to commit civilizational suicide rather than lose, that terrified me more than anything else I learned about them. Madness, Vorn muttered. No, Theron corrected. Strategy. They call it deterrence. Make the cost of aggression so high that no rational being would risk it. And it worked. They've maintained relative peace between their major powers for over 80 years now, specifically because everyone knows that any large-scale war would end everything. He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as his species' physiology allowed. Distinguished delegates, I'm not asking you to fear humans because they're aggressive. I'm asking you to respect them because they understand the true cost of war better than we do. They've lived with that knowledge for their entire history. They're not primitives playing with weapons they don't understand. They're veterans of 10,000 years of conflict who have finally achieved the technology to take that expertise into space. And if someone attacks them? Mora asked quietly. Theron's skin shifted to a color pattern that had no direct translation but conveyed something close to prophetic dread. Then the galaxy will learn that there's a difference between species who know how to fight and species who know how to win. The vote on the quarantine zone failed. 43 delegates voted against, believing Theron's fears were overblown. 15 abstained. Only 5 voted in favor, mostly smaller species who understood what it meant to be underestimated. High Chancellor Vorn delivered the final decision. Ambassador Theron, the Galactic Sovereignty Council appreciates your concerns, but we cannot justify isolating a species based on their cultural history. If and when the humans achieve faster-than-light travel, we will offer them the same opportunities we offer all emerging civilizations, trade, cultural exchange, and membership in our community. Until then, they remain a protected species under the Non-Interference Directive. As the council adjourned, Theron remained at the podium, watching the delegates file out. Most were already discussing other business, dismissing the warning as the overcaution of a naturally timid species. Only Representative Slicks approached him afterward. Ambassador, I hope you're wrong about the humans. Theron's skin patterns shifted to dark gray, the color of mourning. So do I, Representative. So do I. But 3 weeks later, everything changed. High Chancellor Vorn stood in his private office aboard the Dominion flagship Crystal Ascendant, studying the holographic star map that dominated the room. His advisors had been working for 18 standard days on what they called the Soul Opportunity. "Show me the analysis again," Vorn commanded. Chief Economic Strategist Myrax manipulated the display, highlighting Sector 447. "High Chancellor, the Sol system contains remarkable resource density. The fourth planet, they call it Mars, has rare mineral deposits worth approximately 47 trillion credits. The asteroid belt contains enough refined metals to supply our shipyards for 3 decades. The outer planet's moons have water ice in abundance." "And the natives?" Vorn asked. "The humans present minimal opposition," military coordinator Dravix interjected. The warrior caste Vrexian gestured dismissively. "They have approximately 200 military vessels in total, mostly confined to their inner system. No energy weapons above Class 3. No shield technology worth mentioning. Their largest ships are barely 2 kilometers long, smaller than our courier vessels." Myrax continued, "More importantly, they're politically fragmented. We've identified 173 separate nation-states on their homeworld alone, with different languages, cultures, and governing systems. They've only recently established a unified space force, and it's plagued by bureaucratic inefficiencies." Vorn walked around the holographic display, examining Earth from every angle. Ambassador Theron seemed convinced they were dangerous. "With respect, High Chancellor," Dravix said, "the Kelverics are diplomats, not warriors. They see danger in strong words and cultural differences. They've never conducted a military assessment. And you have?" "Extensively." Dravix expanded the display to show detailed schematics of human military installations. "Their weapons are primitive but numerous. They rely heavily on kinetic projectiles, essentially throwing refined metal at high velocity. Effective against their own technology, but our shields can easily dissipate such impacts. Their nuclear devices are crude fission reactions, not the clean fusion or antimatter explosives we employ." "Population?" Vorn inquired. 12 billion on Earth, another 3 million scattered among their colonies on Luna, Mars, and various orbital stations. Significant, but not overwhelming. For context, the Vrexian Dominion controls a population of over 400 billion across our territories. Vorn studied the data in silence. The Dominion had expanded steadily over the past 2,000 standard cycles, always through economic leverage rather than military conquest. They would identify resource-rich systems controlled by weaker species, offer technological advancement in exchange for favorable trade agreements, and eventually absorb the grateful worlds into the Dominion through peaceful annexation. It was cleaner than war, more profitable than piracy, and created far fewer complications with the Galactic Sovereignty Council. "What's our standard approach?" Vorn asked, though he already knew the answer. Myrax smiled. "We offer the humans a simple choice: accept our protection and technology in exchange for resource extraction rights, or face economic isolation and technological stagnation. Given their fragmented political structure, at least some human factions will accept. Once we have a foothold in the system, the rest will follow inevitably. And if they refuse entirely?" Dravix's crystalline features hardened. "Then we impose what the Council calls protective administration. We blockade the system, prevent any external contact, and wait. Without access to galactic markets and technology, their civilization will stagnate. Eventually, they'll accept any terms just to rejoin the greater community." "How long would a blockade take?" Conservative estimate: 30 standard cycles. Aggressive estimate: 10. Humans have short lifespans, 60 to 80 of their years. 1 generation of isolation will break their resistance. Vorn considered the options. The Dominion hadn't used military force in over 400 cycles, but they maintained the largest fleet in the galaxy specifically because no one dared challenge them. 847 capital ships, 4,000 support vessels, and defense stations around every major world. The Vrexian military was designed to intimidate, not fight. There's another factor, Myrax added carefully. The Sol system's location. It sits on the edge of explored space, far from any major trade routes or allied systems. If we move quickly and establish control before the Council can object, we present them with a fait accompli. By the time anyone protests, we'll have already integrated human worlds into our economic sphere. And Ambassador Theron's warning? Myrax's laugh was like crystal bells ringing. High Chancellor, with all respect to the Kelverics, they're frightened of their own shadows. The humans have a violent history. So do the Kragath, and they're now peaceful members of the Dominion. The humans have strong militaries. So did the Torva clans, and they yielded to economic reality within 15 cycles. Dravix added, Theron was spooked by stories and cultural analysis. We've conducted actual military reconnaissance. I've reviewed the footage of human war games and combat exercises. They're impressive by pre-spacefaring standards, but they're facing projectile weapons and chemical explosives with body armor that can't stop our most basic energy pistols. It would be like us fearing beings who still fight with sharpened sticks. Vorn made his decision. Prepare the first contact fleet. 300 vessels, enough to demonstrate overwhelming force without committing our full military. We approach peacefully, offer standard terms, and if they resist, we establish the blockade. I want this resolved within 20 standard days. Yes, High Chancellor, both advisors responded in unison. As they departed to implement the decision, Vorn returned to studying the holographic display of Earth. Something about Theron's warning nagged at him, but he dismissed it as the overcaution the Kelverics were famous for. The Vrexian Dominion hadn't become the galaxy's dominant economic power by being afraid of primitives who hadn't even mastered faster-than-light travel. 3 days later, Ambassador Theron received an urgent communication from his intelligence network. His skin patterns flashed through a dozen colors before settling on the deep gray of morning. They didn't listen, he whispered to his aide. The Vrexians are moving on Sol. Should we warn the humans? The aide asked. Theron considered this. The non-interference directive technically prohibited warning pre-FTL species about galactic politics. But was it really interference if he was trying to prevent a catastrophic conflict? Before he could decide, another message arrived, this one from High Chancellor Vorn himself. Ambassador Theron, the recorded message began. I wanted to inform you personally that the Dominion is initiating peaceful first contact with the humans of Sol system. Your cultural assessment, while colorful, has been deemed overly cautious by our military analysts. I trust that within a few weeks, the humans will be prosperous members of the Dominion, and your fears will be proven unfounded. Vorn's crystalline face showed complete confidence. However, out of respect for your concerns, I'm offering you a position as cultural liaison during the integration process. Your expertise with the humans could be valuable in ensuring a smooth transition. Will you join us? Theron stared at the message for a long moment, then typed his response. High Chancellor, I respectfully decline. What you're about to do cannot be stopped by words alone. I can only hope that when this ends, enough of the galaxy survives to learn from your mistake. He sent the message, then immediately began drafting an emergency appeal to the Galactic Sovereignty Council. It would take 12 standard days to reach them through official channels. By then, Vorn's fleet would already be in orbit around Earth. Theron's aide noticed his trembling arms. Ambassador, surely the Vrexians won't actually attack. They're a peaceful economic power. That's what makes this worse, Theron replied quietly. The Vrexians have never lost because they've never had to fight. They don't know what real war looks like. They're about to threaten a species that has never known anything but war. He pulled up the recording of the human general again, watching that unsettling smile. The humans will teach them, Theron said. And the lesson will be written in fire. The command center of the United Earth Defense Force hummed with quiet efficiency deep beneath the Swiss Alps. Dozens of analysts monitored screens showing data from satellites, ground stations, and the small fleet of human vessels scattered throughout the solar system. Commander Sarah Chen sat in the central chair, reviewing reports with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent 30 years in military service. At 54, she was one of the oldest active officers in the UEDF, having enlisted shortly after the various Earth nations finally unified their space forces in 2098. That had been 27 years ago. The unification had been born from necessity. Asteroid mining operations frequently crossed national boundaries, and without a unified traffic control system, collisions were inevitable. What started as an agreement to share space traffic data had gradually evolved into a proper unified military force. Chen had been against it initially. She'd spent her early career in the Chinese Space Force and was skeptical that dozens of nations with thousands of years of conflict could suddenly work together. But the alternative was worse, leaving Earth defenseless against whatever might exist beyond their solar system. Now, looking at the screens showing their carefully constructed defense network, she felt a mixture of pride and inadequacy. Yes, humanity had achieved remarkable things in just a few decades. But they were still playing catch-up to civilizations that had presumably been spacefaring for thousands of years. The meeting with the Kelverics 3 months ago had confirmed that. The aliens were friendly, advanced, and terrifyingly far ahead of human technology. Their casual demonstrations of faster-than-light travel, artificial gravity, and energy weapons had made it clear that humanity was the equivalent of kindergartners meeting university professors. But the Kelverics had also taught them something valuable: they weren't alone in the universe, and not everyone out there would be friendly. Commander Chen called Lieutenant Harrison from the communications station. "We're picking up something unusual. Multiple FTL signatures appearing at the edge of the solar system." Chen's attention snapped to the main display. Location: approximately $50 out, near the heliopause. Bearing: it's not aligned with any known planetary orbit or major body. How many signatures? Harrison's fingers flew across his console. "I'm reading, Commander, I'm reading 300 distinct signatures. They're dropping out of FTL in perfect formation." The command center went silent. 300 ships. Humanity's entire active fleet numbered 187 vessels, and most of those were converted mining haulers and science vessels with weapons hastily bolted on. They had exactly 12 purpose-built warships, the first of which had only been completed 6 months ago. "Are they transmitting?" Chen asked, keeping her voice level despite the ice forming in her stomach. "Yes, Commander. On standard frequencies, similar to the Kelverics protocols." "The message is," Harrison paused, listening. "They're identifying themselves as the Vrexian Dominion First Contact Fleet. They're requesting permission to enter the inner system for peaceful negotiations." Chen studied the display showing the alien fleet's formation. Even from this distance, the pattern was clear: this was a military arrangement, with larger vessels in the center surrounded by smaller escort craft. This wasn't a diplomatic mission that happened to have military protection. This was a military fleet performing a diplomatic function. "Get me Admiral Okonkwo," Chen ordered. "And wake up everyone in the Security Council. Tell them we have visitors, and they brought enough friends to make it clear we don't have a choice about inviting them in." While her staff scrambled to make the connections, Chen pulled up humanity's first contact protocols. The document had been created hastily after the Kelverics' visit, trying to anticipate every possible scenario. Scenario 7, Contact by potentially hostile force with military superiority. Recommended response: do not provoke. Gather intelligence. Stall while preparing defensive measures. Under no circumstances initiate hostilities unless directly threatened. She almost laughed. Under no circumstances initiate hostilities was good advice when facing 300 ships with unknown weapon systems. Admiral James Okonkwo appeared on her screen within 2 minutes, his dark face creased with concern. The 62-year-old former Nigerian Air Force officer had been humanity's choice to lead the unified fleet specifically because he'd spent his career studying military history. If anyone understood how to face impossible odds, it was Okonkwo. "Sarah, what are we looking at?" he asked without preamble. 300 ships, Admiral. They call themselves Vrexian. Not Kelverics, these are different. And they're in military formation. Okonkwo's jaw tightened. The Kelverics mentioned the Vrexians. Economic powerhouse, de facto leaders of the galactic community, never lost a war because they're too powerful for anyone to fight. That matches what we're seeing. They're requesting permission for peaceful negotiations, but this looks more like a show of force. It is a show of force, Okonkwo replied. They want us to see those 300 ships and understand our position before talks even begin. Classic intimidation tactics, we studied this in officer training. Remember the gunboat diplomacy of the 19th century? Show up with overwhelming force, make peaceful requests, but ensure everyone knows what happens if they refuse. Chen nodded. She'd expected Okonkwo to see through the diplomatic language immediately. What's our response? We respond peacefully and gather intelligence. Accept their request to enter the system, propose meeting coordinates that give us time to mobilize, and get every sensor we have focused on their ships. I want to know everything: weapon systems, shield frequencies, power generation, communication protocols, crew capacity, everything. And if they make demands? Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. Then we stall, negotiate, and pray we can find a way to protect Earth without getting into a fight we cannot possibly win. Should we mobilize the fleet? Yes, but carefully. I don't want them to think we're preparing to attack. Bring our ships to standard defensive positions around Earth and Mars. Make it look routine, not provocative. If they ask, we're simply ensuring their safety during negotiations, protection against space debris, that sort of thing. Chen understood immediately. It was a polite fiction that both sides would recognize. Humanity wasn't trying to fight, but they weren't going to be completely defenseless either. One more thing, Okonkwo added. Get me everything the Kelverics told us about the Vrexians. If we're lucky, our new friends left us enough information to understand what we're dealing with. Over the next 12 hours, as the Vrexian fleet slowly approached the inner solar system, humanity scrambled to prepare. It wasn't preparation for war, that would have been pointless against such overwhelming odds. Instead, it was preparation for survival. Every deep space telescope was asked to observe the alien fleet. Military satellites that usually watched Earth's surface turned their sensors toward the approaching vessels. The small research station on Europa, Jupiter's ice moon, deployed its advanced spectrographic equipment to analyze the alien ship's energy signatures. Chen coordinated the intelligence gathering while Admiral Okonkwo consulted with military strategists from every major nation. The conversations were grim. We cannot win a conventional engagement, stated General Liu of the Chinese Defense Forces, his video connection showing him in a secure facility somewhere in Beijing. Our best warships are outmatched. Even if we used nuclear weapons, we don't know if they would penetrate alien shields. So we don't fight conventionally, replied General Musa from the African Union Forces. Humanity has never won through superior technology alone. We win through adaptation and unconventional thinking. Elaborate, Okonkwo requested. Musa pulled up historical data. The Battle of Agincourt, 1415. French knights with superior armor and numbers defeated by English longbows using terrain and range advantages. The Vietnam War, technologically inferior forces defeating a superpower through guerrilla tactics and willingness to endure losses. We don't fight their war. We fight ours. That's a last resort, Okonkwo said firmly. Right now, we're still in the negotiation phase. I need options that don't involve getting into a shooting war. But even as they planned for diplomacy, other preparations were underway. The civilian government had been briefed, and emergency protocols were activated. Key infrastructure was hardened. Communication networks were backed up. Medical facilities prepared for potential casualties. Evacuation plans for major cities were updated. It wasn't panic. Humans had practiced this before, during the Cold War when nuclear annihilation seemed possible at any moment. The machinery of civil defense, dormant for decades, hummed back to life with disturbing efficiency. In the Alps Command Center, Chen watched as the alien fleet entered the inner solar system. They'd accepted humanity's proposed meeting coordinates, a neutral point in space between Mars and Earth, far from any major installations. The alien vessels were beautiful in a terrifying way. The lead ships were massive crystalline structures that refracted light into rainbow patterns, making them look like mobile jewels. They moved with perfect coordination, each ship maintaining exact distances from its neighbors. "Commander, we're receiving a direct communication," Harrison reported. "They're requesting a video link with Earth's leadership." This was it. First official contact with an alien species that had arrived with an entire war fleet. "Connect them to the Security Council chamber," Chen ordered. "And make sure we're recording everything. Every word, every gesture, every detail. We may need it later." On her screen, she watched as the connection established. The alien who appeared was unlike the friendly Kelverix. This being was tall, elegant, and crystalline, with features that looked carved from colored glass. Its movements were precise, economical, and there was something in its posture that reminded Chen of corporate executives she'd met, beings who were used to getting their way. "Greetings, people of Earth," the alien said, its voice translated by technology into smooth English. "I am High Chancellor Vorn of the Vrexian Dominion. I come bearing opportunities for prosperity and advancement beyond your current comprehension." The speech that followed was polished, professional, and absolutely chilling in its implications. Vorn offered technology, protection, and entry into galactic civilization. All Earth had to do was accept Vrexian administration of the Sol System's resources, acknowledge Dominion authority over interplanetary commerce, and integrate their economy into the Vrexian trade network. It was a protection racket dressed in diplomatic language, and everyone in the command center recognized it immediately. When Vorn finished, there was a pause as the Security Council formulated their response. Chen watched the alien's body language carefully. There was confidence there, absolute certainty that Earth would accept. The 300 ships weren't there to fight, they were there to ensure humanity understood there was only one acceptable answer. The response came from Secretary General Amara Okafor, the Nigerian diplomat who currently led the unified Earth government. Her voice was steady but firm. "High Chancellor Vorn, we appreciate your offer of friendship and exchange. However, the people of Earth require time to consider the implications of such a significant decision. We request 30 days to consult with our various governments and prepare a comprehensive response." A month. They were asking for a month to prepare for whatever was coming. Vorn's crystalline features showed what might have been amusement. "Secretary General, I understand your desire for deliberation. However, my fleet cannot remain on station indefinitely. I can offer you 7 days. After that period, we will require a definitive answer. 7 days to decide the fate of an entire species." Chen watched the negotiations continue for another hour, both sides maintaining diplomatic language while everyone understood the real message. The Vrexians were giving humanity 1 week to surrender peacefully. After that, things would get unpleasant. When the communication finally ended, Admiral Okonkwo appeared on Chen's screen again, his expression grim but determined. "Sarah, get me everything our sensors picked up during that conversation. Every energy fluctuation, every power spike, every piece of data we collected. We have 7 days to figure out how to fight gods." Chen nodded and immediately began coordinating with the intelligence teams. While she worked, a message came through on her personal secure channel. It was from an unknown source, encrypted with protocols she'd never seen before. When she decoded it, she found herself staring at a message from Ambassador Theron of the Kelverics. Commander Chen, the message began, I hope this communication reaches you. I am Ambassador Theron, and I met with your people 3 months ago. I tried to warn my government about what would happen if anyone threatened humanity, but they did not listen. Now the Vrexians are at your doorstep, and I fear what comes next. I cannot offer military assistance, my people are bound by the non-interference directive and our military is negligible compared to the Vrexians. But I can offer you information. I have uploaded complete intelligence files on Vrexian military capabilities, their standard tactics, their technological specifications, and their historical patterns of conquest. I have also included psychological profiles of High Chancellor Vorn and his key advisors. Use this information however you see fit. The Vrexians have never lost a war because they have never truly fought one. They win through intimidation and economic pressure. If you force them into actual combat, they will not know how to adapt. You will need every advantage you can find. One final piece of advice, Commander. The galaxy is watching. Whatever happens in the next 7 days will determine not just Earth's fate, but how every species in known space views humanity. Choose your actions carefully. The message ended with a data packet containing terabytes of information about Vrexian military forces. Chen stared at the screen for a moment, then forwarded everything to Admiral Okonkwo with a single note. We just got a gift from an unexpected friend. Time to figure out how to use it. The next 7 days would determine whether humanity joined the galactic community as free people or conquered subjects. But as Chen looked at the data scrolling across her screens, detailing every weakness and pattern in Vrexian military doctrine, she allowed herself a small smile. The Vrexians were about to learn that giving humans a week to prepare was the worst mistake they could have made. Over the following 168 hours, Earth transformed into a hive of activity that would have seemed impossible to any outside observer. Humanity had spent 10,000 years learning how to wage war, and now all that experience focused on a single problem: how to defeat an enemy with vastly superior technology. In bunkers, research facilities, shipyards, and command centers across Earth and its colonies, thousands of the planet's best minds worked around the clock. The Kelverics' data gave them something invaluable, not hope of victory in conventional terms, but understanding of their enemy's psychology. The Vrexians, it turned out, fought exactly like species who had never actually needed to win a real war. Their tactics were based entirely on overwhelming force and intimidation. Their military doctrine assumed surrender after the first demonstration of power. Their fleet formations prioritized visual impact over tactical flexibility. They had the most powerful military in the galaxy, and they had never been forced to use it creatively. Humanity, on the other hand, had spent millennia fighting enemies with superior numbers, better technology, and more resources. The entire human military tradition was built on finding ways to win impossible fights. Admiral Okonkwo assembled his command staff in the deep bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. The room was packed with officers from every nation, specialists in every form of combat ever devised by human minds. "All right," he began, standing before a massive holographic display showing the Vrexian fleet. "We have 6 days left. Let's be clear about our situation. We cannot win a conventional space battle. Their ships are faster, better armed, and better protected. A straight fight means extinction." "Then we don't give them a straight fight," General Liu said. The elderly Chinese officer pulled up historical battles on his personal display. "Look at Thermopylae. 300 Spartans holding off an army of thousands by choosing the terrain. Look at the Winter War, Finland against the Soviet Union. Look at every successful asymmetric conflict in human history. We win by controlling when, where, and how the battle happens." Dar. Rachel Osei, the Ghanaian physicist who had led Earth's analysis of Kelverics technology, spoke up. "I've been analyzing the Vrexian shield systems. They're designed to deflect energy weapons and disperse kinetic impacts. Incredibly advanced. But they have a fatal flaw. They assume the enemy is using advanced technology. What do you mean? Chen asked. Osei smiled. Their shields are optimized for high-energy plasma bolts and sophisticated missiles. But we've run simulations, and it appears they're actually less effective against primitive kinetic weapons than they would be against advanced ones. The shield generators calculate threat levels based on energy signatures. A high-tech missile reads as dangerous and gets maximum shielding. But a simple chunk of metal moving at high speed? The system barely registers it as a threat. You're saying we should fight their advanced ships with bullets? Commander Zhao of the Chinese Space Force asked incredulously. Not bullets, Osei corrected. Railguns. We take chunks of tungsten or depleted uranium, accelerate them to a significant fraction of light speed using electromagnetic rails, and turn them into relativistic kill vehicles. No explosives, no guidance systems, no energy signatures that scream weapon. Just mass and velocity. At point 2C, a telephone pole-sized projectile has more kinetic energy than a nuclear bomb. General Musa leaned forward. We've been developing railgun technology for asteroid mining. We use them to move large chunks of ore. We could weaponize them. Already done, Osei replied. I've had teams working on it for 3 days. We can't mount them on our ships, they're too small and the recoil would tear them apart. But we can hide them on asteroids, on our orbital stations, even on the lunar surface. Make the Vrexians think they're mining equipment until we fire. Okonkwo studied the tactical implications. How many could we deploy in 6 days? If we repurpose every industrial railgun in the solar system and work without stopping? Maybe 200 installations. Not enough to destroy their fleet, but enough to bloody their nose if they get close. That's a start, Okonkwo said. What else? Commander Sarah Chen had been quietly working on her own analysis. Admiral, I've been studying Vrexian fleet formations based on the Kelverix data. They move in rigid geometric patterns, probably because it looks impressive. But those formations assume they're facing enemies who will attack from predictable vectors. What if we don't? She manipulated the holographic display, showing the solar system with all its planets, moons, asteroids, and orbital infrastructure. The Vrexians are used to space battles in empty void. But our solar system isn't empty. We have thousands of objects in motion, complex gravitational fields, and we know this terrain better than anyone. We've been navigating it for over a century. If we can force them to fight in the asteroid belt, or in the gravity well of Jupiter, or even in low Earth orbit where there's atmospheric drag and debris, we negate their formation advantages. They'll have to break formation to avoid collisions, and that's when they're vulnerable. Brilliant, Okonkwo said. We turn our home system into a weapon. What about their FTL capabilities? They can jump in and out of hyperspace at will. That worried me too, Chen admitted. But according to the Kelverix data, Vrexian FTL drives require several minutes to charge and need clear space to jump safely. If we can keep them engaged in close combat, surrounded by asteroids or debris, they can't jump away without risking catastrophic drive failures. So we make them fight in a phone booth, Musa said with a grim smile. Close quarters where their numerical advantage is limited and they can't run. Over the next several hours, the strategy came together. It wasn't a battle plan designed to win in conventional terms. It was a plan to make the Vrexians pay such a terrible price for attacking Earth that they would reconsider whether the Sol system was worth the cost. Every advantage humanity had would be exploited. Knowledge of local space, experience with asymmetric warfare, willingness to take casualties, and most importantly, the element of surprise. The Vrexians expected primitives with simple weapons. They would face an enemy that had spent 10,000 years learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and better armed than themselves. Captain Marcus Rodriguez of the UEDS Indomitable sat in his command chair, looking at the 47 other ship captains on his communication screen. His vessel was one of the 12 purpose-built warships humanity had managed to construct, but even calling it a warship was generous by galactic standards. It was an 800-meter-long ship with primitive railguns, missile batteries, and armor that would probably vaporize under the first hit from Vrexian energy weapons. But Rodriguez had spent 20 years in the Colombian Navy before joining the Space Force, and he understood something fundamental about warfare. It wasn't the ship that mattered. It was the person commanding it. "Listen up," he said to the assembled captains. "Our job is simple. We're the bait. The Vrexians need to think we're Earth's main defensive force. They need to commit their fleet to destroying us, which means we need to make them think we're a threat worth their full attention." Captain Zhang of the Beijing's Pride shook her head. "Marcus, we have 48 ships. They have 300. If they focus fire on us, we'll be destroyed in minutes." "That's the idea," Rodriguez replied grimly. "We're not trying to win the space battle. We're trying to draw them into the killing zone. Every minute they spend shooting at us is a minute they're not bombarding Earth or retreating to a safe distance. We make them chase us through the asteroid belt, through the debris fields around Mars, anywhere that our hidden weapons can hit them. This is a suicide mission," Captain O'Brien of the Dublin Resistance said quietly. Rodriguez met his eyes through the screen. "It might be. But if we don't do this, Earth gets bombarded from orbit and humanity becomes slaves to an alien empire. I didn't join the Defense Force to watch my planet burn. If any of you want to volunteer for different assignments, now's the time." No one spoke. Finally, Captain Chekhov of the Volgograd broke the silence. "My grandmother survived the siege of Stalingrad in the Second World War. The Nazis surrounded the city, and everyone said surrender or die. She told me that sometimes the only choice is to make the enemy pay for every meter of ground. So we make them pay," Rodriguez said. "For every ship, every life, every kilometer between here and Earth. We make them bleed so badly that the rest of the galaxy hears about it." The day before the Vrexian deadline, Admiral Okonkwo gave a speech that was broadcast to every human on Earth and throughout the colonies. He stood in the command center, wearing his dress uniform, and spoke directly to the camera. "My fellow humans," he began. "By now you all know that an alien force has given us an ultimatum. Submit to their rule, or face destruction. I'm here to tell you that we have chosen a third option. Resistance. Some of you are afraid. That's natural. Some of you think we should surrender, accept their terms, and hope for mercy. I understand that perspective. But I want you to understand something about who we are as a species. For 10,000 years, our ancestors faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. They faced armies that outnumbered them, enemies with better weapons, and situations that seemed hopeless. Sometimes they lost. But they never stopped fighting. They never accepted that defeat was inevitable." The camera angle widened to show the command center behind him, dozens of officers working at their stations, preparing for the battle to come. "The Vrexians think we're primitives who will fold at the first sign of real opposition. They think our technology is too backward, our numbers too small, our chances too slim. They're probably right about the numbers and the technology. But they're wrong about us. We are humans. We are the species that looked at the stars and decided we belonged there. We are the descendants of people who crossed oceans in wooden boats, who climbed mountains because they were there, who split the atom and walked on the moon. We don't surrender just because the odds are bad. We fight until we win, or until there's nothing left to fight with." His voice grew stronger, more passionate. "Tomorrow, the Vrexian fleet will attack our world. They expect us to break, to beg, to accept slavery rather than risk destruction. Instead, they're going to learn what every other enemy in human history has learned. We are not afraid of death. We are not afraid of sacrifice. We are afraid of living as slaves. So tomorrow, when their ships come, we will fight. Some of us will die. Maybe all of us will die. But we will make them remember Earth. We will make them regret ever pointing their weapons at our world. And we will show the galaxy that humanity does not kneel. The broadcast ended, but within hours, the speech had been translated into every human language and shared billions of times. In cities across Earth, people gathered in the streets, not in panic, but in defiance. They understood what was coming, and they chose to face it standing up. In orbit around Mars, Captain Rodriguez watched the speech with his crew. When it ended, his weapons officer, a young woman from Brazil named Lieutenant Silva, turned to him. "Captain, do you really think we can win?" Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "Win? Probably not, if winning means destroying their entire fleet and forcing them to run. But if winning means making them understand they picked the wrong species to threaten. Yeah. I think we can do that." High Chancellor Vorn received Earth's official response exactly 7 days after his ultimatum, delivered by Secretary-General Okafor with a calm that he found irritating. "High Chancellor," Okafor said via the communication link. "The people of Earth have considered your offer carefully. Our answer is no. We will not surrender our sovereignty. We will not accept foreign rule over our system. And we will not negotiate terms of submission." Vorn's crystalline features showed surprise. "Secretary-General, you understand what this means. You are choosing war with the Vrexian Dominion." "We are choosing freedom," Okafor corrected. "You are choosing extinction," Vorn replied coldly. "My fleet will begin bombardment operations in 6 hours. Any ships or stations that resist will be destroyed. Any planetary settlements that do not immediately surrender will be reduced to ash. This is your final chance to reconsider." Okafor leaned forward, and for the first time, Vorn saw something in her eyes that made him uncomfortable. "High Chancellor, you've never lost a war because you've never fought an enemy that was willing to lose everything rather than surrender. You're about to learn the difference between species who fight for profit and species who fight for survival." The communication ended. Vorn stared at the blank screen for a moment, then turned to his military coordinator. "Dravix, begin the assault. Standard bombardment pattern. Target their orbital installations first, then their fleet, then their planetary defenses. I want this over quickly." "As you command, High Chancellor." The Vrexian fleet moved into attack formation, their crystalline ships glowing with charged weapons. 300 vessels arranged themselves in the perfect geometric pattern they had used for hundreds of successful intimidation campaigns. It looked magnificent, overwhelming, unstoppable. On Earth, in the command center beneath the Alps, Commander Chen watched the enemy fleet advance. Her hands were steady on her console as she gave the first order of the war. "All units, weapons free. Make them bleed." The battle for Sol had begun. The Vrexian fleet approached Earth's outer defensive perimeter with the confidence of a force that had never tasted defeat. High Chancellor Vorn watched from his flagship as the first wave of attackers, 50 fast attack vessels, accelerated toward the asteroid belt where human forces had concentrated their defensive positions. "This will be over in hours," Vorn said to Dravix. "Once they see the futility of resistance, they'll surrender." But the first indication that something was wrong came when the Vrexian attack vessels entered the asteroid field. Long-range sensors showed the human ships exactly where intelligence had predicted, clustered around the larger asteroids, using them for cover. The Vrexian ships began firing their plasma cannons, expecting the primitive human vessels to scatter or be destroyed. Instead, space itself seemed to explode with violence. The asteroids that the Vrexians had dismissed as mere cover suddenly fired. Not with energy weapons or missiles that their sensors could track, but with solid slugs of metal accelerated to terrifying velocities. The Vrexian shields, designed to deflect sophisticated plasma weapons, barely registered the simple chunks of tungsten until they hit. At 20% of light speed, the projectiles carried kinetic energy that made nuclear weapons look gentle. The first Vrexian ship to be hit was the Swift Ascension, a fast attack cruiser. The railgun slug punched through its shields as if they weren't there, passed through the crystalline hull, and exited the other side. The ship didn't explode. It simply stopped functioning, its entire power core destroyed by hydrostatic shock that propagated through the crystalline structure. 6 more Vrexian ships died in the first salvo, and suddenly the attack formation was in chaos. "What's happening?" Vorn demanded. "Unknown weapons," Dravix replied, his voice showing the first hint of uncertainty. "They appear to be solid projectiles, but moving at relativistic speeds. Our shields aren't stopping them." "Impossible!" Vorn exclaimed. "How can primitives without energy weapons generate such velocities?" The answer came from the sensor data now flooding into the Vrexian flagship. The asteroids weren't just cover. They were weapon platforms. Humanity had mounted electromagnetic railguns on dozens of asteroids, using the mining equipment the Vrexians had seen in their reconnaissance but dismissed as harmless. "Reconfigure shields for kinetic impacts," Vorn ordered. "Maximum density." The Vrexian ships began adjusting their defenses, but that process took time, and the human forces weren't giving them any. Captain Rodriguez watched from the Indomitable as the first Vrexian ships died. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Silva, was almost laughing with relief. "It's working, Captain. Their shields can't handle the railguns." "Don't celebrate yet," Rodriguez replied. "They'll adapt. All ships, execute attack pattern Delta. Make them chase us deeper into the belt." The 48 human warships broke from their positions and accelerated deeper into the asteroid field, firing as they went. Their weapons were primitive compared to Vrexian technology, but they had one advantage. The humans knew every rock, every gravity well, and every gap in the asteroid belt. They'd been mining this region for 80 years. The Vrexian ships pursued, their superior speed allowing them to close the distance quickly. But as they entered the densest part of the belt, their perfect formation began to break apart. The geometric patterns that looked so impressive in open space became liabilities when navigating through a field of tumbling rocks, some the size of small moons. The human ship slipped through gaps that seemed impossibly tight, using gravitational assists and last-second course corrections that made Vrexian navigators gasp in horror. The alien ships, larger and less maneuverable, had to slow down or risk collision. And when they slowed down, the hidden railgun platforms fired again. "Captain, we're taking fire from multiple vectors," the Vrexian commander of the Crystal Blade reported to Dravix. "These humans are using the asteroid field itself as a weapon. The terrain is too hazardous for effective pursuit." "Then clear the terrain," Vorn ordered. "Use the singularity torpedoes. Destroy every asteroid large enough to hide their weapons." The Vrexian fleet began launching their most powerful weapons, exotic missiles that created miniature black holes on impact, literally erasing matter from existence. Dozens of asteroids simply disappeared as the singularity torpedoes struck. But humanity had anticipated this. The railgun platforms weren't stationary. They were mounted on mobile mining rigs that had been moving through the asteroid belt for decades. The moment a position was compromised, the platform would relocate. And the Vrexians, focused on their bombardment, didn't notice the human trap until it was too late. Commander Chen had coordinated the trap with precision that would have made any human military strategist proud. While the Vrexians were focused on the asteroid belt, destroying rocks and chasing human ships, she had repositioned the bulk of Earth's defensive satellites. They weren't much, mostly converted scientific instruments and communication relays with weapons hastily attached. But they didn't need to be powerful. They just needed to be in the right place. The Vrexian fleet had advanced in a predictable pattern, pushing into the asteroid belt with their main force while keeping their command vessels in what they thought was a safe rear position. High Chancellor Vorn's flagship, the Crystal Ascendant, sat at the center of this rear guard, protected by 100 ships in a defensive sphere. Chen had used humanity's detailed maps of orbital mechanics to place 50 small satellites in trajectories that would bring them into contact with the Vrexian rear guard at exactly the right moment. They weren't sophisticated weapons. They were bombs. Simple nuclear fission devices, the kind humanity had been building since 1945. Primitive, crude, and utterly invisible to Vrexian sensors designed to detect advanced antimatter warheads and exotic quantum explosives. When the first satellite detonated inside the Vrexian defensive sphere, it took out 3 ships with the electromagnetic pulse alone. The second, third, and fourth followed within seconds, creating a cascade of nuclear fire that shredded the carefully maintained formation. Vorn's flagship lurched as a nearby explosion sent shockwaves through its shields. The High Chancellor gripped his command throne, staring in disbelief at the tactical display. How did they get weapons past our sensors? Nuclear fission, Dravix reported, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. Primitive atomic weapons. Our sensors are calibrated to detect modern explosives. These are so crude they barely registered as threats until they detonated. We're being defeated by primitive nuclear bombs? Vorn asked incredulously. The absurdity of it was staggering. The Vrexian Dominion, with technology centuries ahead of humanity, was taking casualties from weapons that were ancient by galactic standards. But in that moment, High Chancellor Vorn began to understand what Ambassador Theron had tried to warn them about. It wasn't about having the best weapons. It was about knowing how to use whatever weapons you had with maximum effectiveness. The humans weren't trying to fight a conventional war. They were fighting a war of attrition, adaptation, and asymmetric tactics. Every weapon system the Vrexians possessed was designed to counter advanced threats. The humans were attacking with primitive technology that slipped past sensors, shields, and defensive protocols designed for a completely different kind of warfare. Pull the fleet back, Vorn ordered. Regroup at the Mars orbital point. We need to reassess their capabilities. But pulling back proved harder than advancing. The human ships in the asteroid belt weren't content to let the Vrexians retreat in good order. Captain Rodriguez led his squadron in a series of hit-and-run attacks, darting in to fire missiles and railgun rounds before disappearing behind asteroid cover. The Indomitable had already taken 3 hits. Rodriguez's ship was venting atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches, half his weapons were offline, and his engines were operating at 60% capacity. But he kept fighting. All ships, Rodriguez called to his squadron. Pattern Omega. We're going to do something stupid. Captain O'Brien of the Dublin Resistance understood immediately. You're going to ram them. Not ram, Rodriguez corrected. We're going to make them think we're going to ram them. Make them waste ammunition on point defense. Pattern Omega was a tactic that had been devised during the planning sessions. It was based on a simple psychological principle. If an enemy thinks you're willing to crash your ship into theirs at high speed, they will dedicate resources to stopping you, even if you pull away at the last second. The 12 human warships accelerated toward the retreating Vrexian formation at maximum burn, their engines redlined and alarms blaring. The Vrexian point defense systems immediately activated, assuming the humans were attempting suicide ramming attacks. Thousands of defensive plasma bolts filled space as the Vrexian ships tried to destroy the incoming human vessels. But the human ships weren't aiming to hit. At the last possible second, they used emergency thruster burns to veer away, passing within meters of the Vrexian hulls. The Vrexians had just wasted enormous amounts of ammunition and power destroying threats that were never going to hit them. And in that moment of confusion, the hidden railgun platforms in the asteroid belt fired again, targeting the Vrexian ships that had depleted their defensive systems. 15 more crystalline vessels shattered under the kinetic impacts. The Vrexian fleet finally made it out of the asteroid belt, regrouping near Mars orbit. Of the 300 ships that had entered the Sol system with such confidence, 47 were destroyed or disabled. The survivors showed signs of damage that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. Vorn stood in his command center, staring at the casualty reports. His crystalline hands trembled with a mixture of rage and something he had never felt before in military operations, uncertainty. How? He asked quietly. How are we losing to primitives? Dravik studied the tactical data with professional detachment, though his voice carried an undercurrent of respect. High Chancellor, these humans are not fighting the way civilized species fight. They are using every resource available, regardless of how crude or primitive. They are willing to sacrifice ships and lives without hesitation. And most critically, they understand their own territory better than we do. This is their system. They've mapped every asteroid, every orbital trajectory, every gravitational anomaly. We're fighting blind while they have perfect intelligence. Then we blind them, Vorn said. Target their communication satellites. Destroy their sensor networks. Reduce their ability to coordinate. The Vrexian fleet began systematically destroying human infrastructure in orbit around Earth and Mars. Communication satellites, GPS systems, weather monitoring stations, all were reduced to debris. It was an effective strategy. On Earth, billions of people suddenly lost contact with their colonies, their fleets, and each other. Power grids fluctuated as satellite links failed. The carefully coordinated defense began to fragment. But humanity had planned for this too. In command centers across Earth, military officers switched to backup communication systems. Radio transmissions, laser links, even old-fashioned telephone lines buried underground. The global network fractured into regional networks, but it didn't collapse. General Musa, coordinating the African Union Defense Forces, sent a message via secure underground cable. This is exactly what we trained for. Remember Bosnia. Remember Rwanda. Communication breakdowns don't stop armies. They force them to rely on initiative and local command. Every officer knows the overall plan. Execute on local authority. Across Earth, military units began operating with independence that would have seemed chaotic to the centralized Vrexian command structure. But it was organized chaos, built on 10,000 years of military doctrine that emphasized officer initiative and decentralized decision-making. The Vrexians had destroyed humanity's coordination systems, but they had also removed the single point of failure that would have allowed them to decapitate the defense with one strike. There was no central command to destroy anymore. There were thousands of independent units, all working toward the same goal by following ingrained training and doctrine. Vorn realized too late that he had made the situation worse, not better. Now instead of facing one coordinated enemy, he was facing hundreds of independent forces, each adapting to local conditions faster than his centralized command could respond. The battle for Sol continued for 3 more days. The Vrexian fleet maintained their position near Mars, bombarding the human colony there while trying to establish control over Earth's orbital space. Human forces continued to harry them with guerrilla attacks, hidden weapons, and tactics that seemed to come from historical warfare rather than space combat. On the 3rd day, something changed that would alter the course of the war. Captain Rodriguez had been coordinating with the mining colonies in the asteroid belt when the idea hit him. He called Admiral Okonkwo on a secure laser link. "Admiral, we've been fighting defensively. I think it's time we go on the offensive." Okonkwo's face on the screen showed exhaustion. "Marcus, we're barely holding them off now. What kind of offensive are you proposing?" Rodriguez pulled up his tactical display. "The Vrexians have been stationary near Mars for 2 days, bombarding the colony. They think they're in a safe position, outside the asteroid belt, with clear space for their sensors. But Mars has something they don't have on their home worlds. Atmosphere. It's thin, but it's there. And that means friction." "I don't follow," Okonkwo admitted. Rodriguez smiled grimly. "The Vrexians are used to space combat. They've never had to worry about atmospheric entry, re-entry heating, or aerodynamic forces. But we have. Every human spaceship is designed with re-entry capability. We can survive in atmospheric conditions. I don't think they can. You want to lure them into Mars' atmosphere?" Okonkwo asked incredulously. "I want to crash them into it," Rodriguez corrected. "Their ships are crystalline structures, probably grown rather than built. Beautiful in vacuum, but I bet they're not designed for atmospheric stress. If we can trick them into pursuing us on a low orbit trajectory, the atmospheric friction alone might tear their ships apart. It's insane, Okonkwo said. But then he smiled. Do it. Captain Rodriguez took the 7 surviving ships of his squadron on what everyone expected to be a suicide run. They dropped from the asteroid belt toward Mars at maximum acceleration, broadcasting distress signals and fake damage reports. The Vrexian fleet, eager to eliminate what they thought was a crippled human force, gave chase. The human ships entered Mars' upper atmosphere at a steep angle, their hulls beginning to glow from friction heating. Every ship was designed for this. They had heat shields, ablative armor, and aerodynamic controls that allowed them to maneuver even in the thin Martian air. The Vrexian ships that followed them did not. The first Vrexian cruiser to enter the atmosphere at high speed immediately began experiencing problems. The crystalline structure that looked so beautiful in space started resonating from the vibrations of atmospheric friction. Cracks appeared in the hull. Internal atmosphere began venting. Then the ship simply shattered, breaking into thousands of glittering fragments that scattered across the Martian sky like a meteor shower. 5 more Vrexian ships met the same fate before their commanders realized what was happening. The survivors pulled up desperately, trying to escape back into the safety of vacuum. But the human ships had already completed their atmospheric pass and were coming around for another attack run, this time from below, where the Vrexians couldn't easily target them without risking more atmospheric entry. Rodriguez's gambit had worked. The Vrexian fleet retreated from Mars orbit entirely, unwilling to risk more ships to atmospheric tactics. The human colony on Mars, badly damaged but not destroyed, survived. High Chancellor Vorn called an emergency council meeting aboard his flagship. His military coordinator, his economic advisor, and his strategic planner all attended via holographic link. They had been in the Sol system for 3 days and had suffered casualties that exceeded their losses from the last 400 years combined. We cannot continue like this, Vorn said flatly. Our ships are damaged, our crews are exhausted, and these humans show no sign of surrendering. We need to escalate. To what? Dravix asked carefully. We've already used singularity torpedoes. We've bombarded their colonies. Short of using planet-killer weapons, there's not much escalation available. And if we use planet killers, Myrax added, the Galactic Council will intervene. Destroying pre-FTL species is absolutely forbidden. Even the Dominion cannot violate that law without facing sanctions from all 63 member species. Then what do you suggest? Vorn demanded. We withdraw, Dravix said quietly. High Chancellor, we have lost 53 ships. We have another 80 that will require extensive repairs before they can fight effectively. The humans have lost most of their fleet but their planetary defenses remain intact, and they show no sign of surrender. If we continue, we may win eventually, but the cost will be catastrophic. Withdraw. Vorn's crystalline features showed outrage. The Vrexian Dominion has never withdrawn from conquest. Our reputation is built on inevitability. If we retreat from one primitive species, every other species will think they can resist us too. With respect, High Chancellor, Myrax interjected, our reputation is already damaged. The galaxy is watching this battle. Every species with long-range sensors can see what's happening. They're watching primitives without FTL technology fight us to a standstill. Our intimidation factor is already gone. The only question is whether we make it worse by continuing to take casualties, or we salvage what we can by retreating strategically. Vorn was silent for a long moment. Everything he had believed about Vrexian superiority was crumbling. They weren't losing because their technology was inferior. They were losing because they had never learned how to fight an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. Before he could respond, an alarm sounded throughout the flagship. His sensor officer's voice came through, tight with panic. High Chancellor. We have new contacts. Multiple ships dropping out of FTL at the edge of the system. The tactical display activated, showing the outer reaches of the Sol system. 20 new vessels had appeared, but they weren't human ships. These were Kelverix diplomatic vessels, accompanied by ships from a dozen other species. And at the center of the formation was a massive vessel displaying the colors of the Galactic Sovereignty Council. Ambassador Theron's voice came through on open channels, broadcasting to both the Vrexian fleet and Earth's defenders. This is Ambassador Theron of the Kelverix Confederation, speaking on behalf of an emergency Galactic Council delegation. We are here to mediate an immediate ceasefire between the Vrexian Dominion and the human species of Earth. Vorn's hands clenched. Theron. Of course the meddling diplomat would appear now, when everything had gone wrong. High Chancellor Vorn, Theron continued, the Council has been monitoring this conflict. Your actions violate several protocols regarding first contact with pre-FTL species. A formal inquiry has been initiated. Vorn wanted to argue, to explain that the humans had refused reasonable terms, but he could see how this would play out. The Council investigation would reveal that the Vrexians had initiated hostilities against a protected species. The Dominion's reputation would be destroyed not by military defeat, but by political scandal. And the humans, Theron said, his tone changing to something almost gentle. You have proven your point. The galaxy now knows that your species cannot be intimidated or easily conquered. But continuing this war serves no one. Your planet is at risk of orbital bombardment. Your colonies are damaged. More importantly, you have lost significant portions of your defensive fleet. A prolonged war will cost you everything you've built. On Earth, in the command center beneath the Alps, Admiral Okonkwo listened to the mediation offer. Commander Chen stood beside him, her face showing the exhaustion of 3 days without sleep. Admiral, Chen said quietly. We can't win a prolonged conflict. We've hurt them badly, but if they commit to total war, they can eventually overwhelm us through sheer numbers. Okonkwo nodded. I know. But we've accomplished something more important than victory. We've shown them that attacking Earth has consequences. We've made them bleed. We've proven that humanity doesn't surrender. That's worth accepting a ceasefire for. He activated the communication system, broadcasting on all frequencies. This is Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Earth Defense Force. We accept the Council's mediation offer. Humanity is willing to negotiate a ceasefire, provided our sovereignty is recognized and no reparations are demanded for defending our home. There was a long pause. Then High Chancellor Vorn's voice came through, and for the first time, it carried a note of respect rather than contempt. This is High Chancellor Vorn. The Vrexian Dominion agrees to ceasefire negotiations. We will comply with the Council's mediation process. The battle for Sol ended not with a decisive victory for either side, but with mutual exhaustion and recognition of a new reality. Humanity had proven itself capable of defending its home against vastly superior forces. The Vrexians had learned that technological superiority didn't guarantee victory against an enemy with the will to fight. The negotiations took place aboard the Council mediation vessel over the next week. Ambassador Theron served as the primary mediator, with representatives from both sides working to establish terms that both could accept. The final agreement, known as the Sol Accords, established several key principles. First, humanity's sovereignty over the Sol system was recognized absolutely. No external power could claim resource rights or demand tribute. Second, the Vrexian Dominion formally apologized for initiating hostilities and agreed to pay reparations for damage to Mars colony and other human installations. Third, and most importantly, humanity was granted immediate membership in the Galactic Sovereignty Council, despite not having achieved FTL technology. The precedent was unprecedented, but the logic was clear. Any species that could fight off a Vrexian invasion deserved a seat at the galactic table. Admiral Okonkwo and Commander Chen attended the final signing ceremony aboard the Council vessel. They stood in a vast chamber with representatives from 63 different species, all watching as humanity officially joined the galactic community. Vorn approached them after the ceremony, his crystalline features showing something that might have been respect. "Admiral Okonkwo," he said formally. "I underestimated your species. I thought your warnings were exaggeration, and your military traditions were primitive superstition. I was wrong." Okonkwo extended his hand, a human gesture of respect. "High Chancellor, we didn't win this war. We survived it. That's all we ever needed to do." Vorn studied the offered hand, then carefully grasped it with his crystalline appendage. "Perhaps," he said. "But you taught me something valuable. There is a difference between having the best weapons and knowing how to fight. Your people understand war in ways we have forgotten." As the ceremony continued, Ambassador Theron approached Commander Chen. She looked at the Kelvarix diplomat with gratitude. "Thank you," Chen said. "Your intelligence files saved countless lives. We wouldn't have survived without them." Theron's skin patterns shifted to colors that conveyed satisfaction mixed with sadness. "Commander, I tried to warn my government about humans. They didn't listen. So I did what I could to ensure that when conflict came, it wouldn't end in genocide. I hope you understand that this war will change the galaxy. Every species now knows that humans can fight. That knowledge will bring you both friends and enemies." Chen nodded. "We understand. But we didn't fight to become conquerors. We fought to remain free. That's all we've ever wanted." Theron's skin patterns shifted again, this time to a color that had no human equivalent but somehow conveyed hope. "Then perhaps there is a place for humans in the galaxy after all. Not as conquerors. Not as victims. But as the species that understands what others have forgotten. The cost of peace is eternal vigilance. The price of freedom is the willingness to fight for it." Chen smiled. "That's been our philosophy for 10,000 years. We're not going to change now." 6 months after the Soul Accords were signed, humanity's first faster-than-light vessel was completed. The design was based partly on Kelvarix technology, shared as part of the new friendship between their species, but improved by human engineers who approached the problem from completely different angles. The ship was named Ambassador Theron, in honor of the being who had tried to prevent the war and then helped end it with minimal loss of life. Captain Rodriguez, promoted after his actions during the battle, was given command of the vessel. His mission was simple but profound. Represent humanity to the galaxy. Show them who we are. On the day of the launch, Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his new ship, looking out at Earth through the viewport. His crew, drawn from every nation and culture on the planet, worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. Admiral Okonkwo's face appeared on the communication screen. "Marcus, you ready for this?" "More ready than I was for the last time I faced aliens," Rodriguez replied with a slight smile. "At least this time I'm pretty sure they won't shoot at me." Okonkwo chuckled. "The galaxy is going to be interesting with humans in it. Try not to start any wars." "No promises, Admiral. But if someone does start a war with us, they'll regret it." "That's the point," Okonkwo said seriously. "The galaxy now knows what happens when you threaten Earth. They've seen the footage, read the reports, heard the stories. Every species out there understands that humans are not to be trifled with. Use that reputation wisely." Rodriguez nodded. "We will, sir. We're not looking for fights. But we're not afraid of them either." As the Ambassador Theron prepared to engage its FTL drive for the first time, Rodriguez thought about everything that had happened. Humanity had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. They had faced an enemy with superior technology and won through courage, creativity, and an absolute refusal to surrender. The galaxy had learned that humans were dangerous. But more importantly, humans had learned that they belonged among the stars. The FTL drive engaged, and the ship disappeared in a flash of light, carrying humanity's message to the galaxy. We are here. We are strong. And we will not be intimidated. In the Vrexian capital, High Chancellor Vorn stood in his private chambers, looking at a holographic display of the Sol system. His advisors had suggested he try to forget the humiliation of the failed conquest, move on to other opportunities. But Vorn couldn't forget. He had learned too much. A communication alert interrupted his thoughts. It was a message from Earth, specifically from Admiral Okonkwo. Vorn almost ignored it, but curiosity won out. High Chancellor, the message began. I wanted to reach out to you personally, not as a former enemy, but as someone who might understand what I'm about to say. The war between our peoples was brutal, costly, and ultimately pointless. We both suffered losses that didn't need to happen. But I don't regret it, and I hope you don't either. Vorn's crystalline features showed surprise. Why would the human admiral not regret a war that had nearly destroyed his world? Because, Okonkwo continued, that war taught both our species something vital. You learned that power without wisdom leads to defeat. We learned that we have a place in the galaxy, that our way of thinking about conflict has value even among species with advanced technology. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Chancellor. There are species out there who won't be as restrained as the Vrexians were. There are threats that neither of our peoples can face alone. I'm proposing something unprecedented. A mutual defense pact between Earth and the Vrexian Dominion. If anyone attacks either of our territories, we respond together. You bring your advanced technology and industrial capacity. We bring our tactical experience and willingness to fight asymmetrically. Vorn stared at the message in disbelief. The humans wanted to ally with the species that had tried to conquer them. The logic is simple, Okonkwo's message continued. You're a powerful civilization that forgot how to fight. We're a young species that never stopped learning how to fight. Together, we'd be almost impossible to defeat. And more importantly, the alliance itself would serve as a deterrent. No one wants to face Vrexian technology combined with human tactics. Think about it, Chancellor. Our peoples don't have to be enemies. We can be partners. The galaxy will be a lot more careful about starting wars if they know that attacking one of us means facing both of us. Vorn sat in silence for a long time after the message ended. His initial instinct was to refuse, to maintain Vrexian pride and independence. But then he thought about the casualties his people had taken, the ships lost, the reputation damaged. He thought about Ambassador Theron's warnings that he had ignored. Most of all, he thought about the human general's smile when discussing war. These beings understood something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Sometimes the best way to prevent war was to be so dangerous that no one dared to start one. He drafted his response carefully. Admiral Okonkwo, the Vrexian Dominion accepts your proposal. Let us begin negotiations for a defensive alliance. Perhaps together, our peoples can teach the galaxy a new lesson. Peace is not weakness. It is simply the gap between wars. And those who are best prepared for war are often those who can best maintain peace. The message sent, Vorn returned to looking at the holographic display of Earth. A blue and green world, beautiful and fragile, inhabited by beings who had spent 10,000 years learning how to destroy each other but had somehow also learned when to choose restraint. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had arrived, and they had made their introduction in the most human way possible. With fire, blood, courage, and an absolute refusal to kneel. In the years that followed, the Human-Vrexian alliance became one of the most powerful political and military forces in the galaxy. The combination of Vrexian industrial might and human tactical innovation proved exactly as formidable as Okonkwo had predicted. But more importantly, the alliance became a symbol of something the galaxy desperately needed. Redemption. Two species that had nearly destroyed each other instead chose to build something together. The Galactic Sovereignty Council watched this development with mixed feelings. Some species were nervous about such a powerful alliance. Others saw it as a model for how former enemies could become partners. Ambassador Theron, now serving as the Kelvric's representative to Earth, watched with quiet satisfaction. He had tried to prevent the war and failed. But the outcome had been better than he could have hoped. Humanity hadn't conquered the Vrexians. They had earned their respect. And in doing so, they had created a partnership that would shape the galaxy for generations to come. On Earth, in the command center beneath the Swiss Alps, Commander Chen reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The galaxy was vast, full of opportunities and dangers. But humanity was ready. They had proven they could defend themselves. Now they would prove they could be valuable members of the galactic community. A young officer approached her station. "Commander, we're receiving reports of a distress call from a Klixian colony ship. They're under attack by pirates in Sector 892. That's far from Earth," Chen observed. "Outside our territory." "Yes, ma'am. But the Klixians voted for our inclusion in the council. And they're requesting assistance." Chen smiled. "Then we assist. That's what allies do. Dispatch the nearest patrol group and alert Admiral Okonkwo. Let's show the galaxy that humans don't just know how to fight. We also know who to fight for." The patrol group jumped to FTL, heading toward the distant colony ship. They would arrive in time to drive off the pirates, rescue the Klixians, and earn humanity another ally. Because that was the real lesson of the war with the Vrexians. Strength wasn't just about how much damage you could inflict. It was about knowing when to fight, when to show mercy, and when to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Humanity had spent 10,000 years learning how to wage war. Now they would spend the next 10,000 years learning how to build peace. But they would do it their way. With open hands and ready weapons. With friendship offered freely and threats answered decisively. The galaxy had been warned. Humans were here. And they had brought with them something that had been missing from galactic civilization for too long. The understanding that peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the triumph of those who are strong enough to choose restraint. The ambassador's warning had come too late to prevent the war. But it had been proven correct in every way. Humans were dangerous. Not because they were violent. But because they understood violence better than anyone else in the galaxy. And they had chosen to use that understanding not for conquest, but for protection. The story of humanity's arrival in the galaxy would be told for thousands of years. Not as a tale of conquest or domination. But as a story of a species that refused to surrender, earned respect through courage, and chose to build bridges instead of empires. And whenever young beings across the galaxy asked their elders why humans were treated with such respect, the answer was always the same. Because they were warned. They were threatened. They were attacked. And instead of being destroyed or conquered, they fought back with such ferocity and intelligence that they turned their enemies into allies. That is the human way. And the galaxy is better for it. In the command center, as Chen finished her shift and prepared to head home, she paused to look at a memorial wall that had been installed after the war. It listed the names of every human who had died defending Earth during those terrible 3 days. Over 40,000 names. Ship crews, station personnel, colony defenders, and civilians caught in the bombardment. She touched her hand to the wall, feeling the cold stone under her fingers. "You didn't die for nothing," she whispered. "You died so that humanity could take its place among the stars. So that we would never have to kneel. So that our children could explore the galaxy as free people. The sacrifice was worth it." Behind her, the command center continued its endless work, monitoring the solar system, tracking ships, coordinating with allies across dozens of star systems. Earth was safe now, protected by treaties, alliances, and most importantly, by the reputation earned through blood and courage. The galaxy had learned its lesson. And humanity had learned theirs. Some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth dying for. And freedom, the right to determine your own fate among the stars, that was worth everything. The ambassador had been right to warn them. And he had been right to help when warning failed. Now, as humanity spread across the galaxy, they carried that lesson with them. Be kind when possible. Be fierce when necessary. And never, ever, underestimate a species that has spent 10,000 years learning how to survive impossible odds. The story of Earth's war with the Vrexians became legend. The story of Earth's alliance with the Vrexians became hope. And the story of humanity's arrival among the stars became a promise. We are here. We are strong. And we will protect those who cannot protect themselves. That was the real message. That was the real warning. Not a threat, but a promise. And the galaxy learned to trust that promise. Because humans, dangerous as they were, had proven they were trustworthy. They had proven they could choose peace even when war was easier. And that made all the difference. The end of the war was not the end of humanity's story. It was just the beginning. A beginning where humanity would explore the stars not as conquerors, but as protectors. Not as victims, but as partners. Not as primitives learning from their betters, but as equals who had earned their place through blood, courage, and wisdom. The galaxy stretched before them, infinite and full of possibilities. Some of those possibilities would be peaceful. Some would be dangerous. But humanity faced them all with the same attitude they had always had. Hope tempered by readiness. Friendship offered with weapons close at hand. And above all, the absolute certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them standing tall. Because that was what humans did. They survived. They adapted. They fought when necessary. And they never, ever surrendered. Ambassador Theron watched from his quarters as the human ship Ambassador Theron jumped to FTL, carrying humanity's message across the stars. He had tried to warn the galaxy about humans. He had failed to prevent the war. But in the end, perhaps the war had been necessary. Perhaps the galaxy needed to learn the hard way what humanity was capable of. Now they knew. And now, the real story could begin. The story of humanity among the stars. The story of a species that understood war so well that they became the greatest advocates for peace. The story of beings who had spent 10,000 years learning how to destroy each other, and then chose to use that knowledge to protect others instead. It was a good story. And like all good stories, it was just the beginning. Years would pass. Decades. Centuries. Humanity would explore thousands of worlds, make alliances with dozens of species, and yes, fight wars when peace failed. But they would never forget the lesson of those 3 days when 300 Vrexian ships came to conquer Earth. The lesson that courage matters more than technology. That wisdom matters more than weapons. That knowing when not to fight is just as important as knowing how to fight. And most importantly, that the strongest species are not those who can destroy their enemies, but those who can turn their enemies into friends. The galaxy had been forever changed by humanity's arrival. And humanity had been forever changed by the galaxy's response. Together, they would build something new. Something better. A civilization where strength served justice, where power protected the weak, and where the hard-earned lessons of 10,000 years of human warfare would be used to prevent wars rather than wage them. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. That was their legacy. Not conquest. Not domination. But the wisdom that comes from understanding conflict so deeply that you know exactly how to prevent it. And when prevention fails, how to end it quickly, decisively, and with mercy. The ambassador's warning had been ignored. The war had been fought. The lesson had been learned. Now, the real work could begin. The work of building a galaxy where such wars became unnecessary. Where the threat of conflict was enough to prevent it. Where species could disagree without destroying each other. It was an ambitious dream. Perhaps an impossible one. But if any species could achieve it, it would be humanity. Because they had spent 10,000 years learning how to fight. And now they were ready to spend the next 10,000 years teaching the galaxy how to live in peace. Not through weakness. Not through surrender. But through strength tempered by wisdom. Through power restrained by choice. Through the understanding that the greatest victory is the war you never have to fight. And so humanity took its place among the stars, carrying with them the lessons of Earth, the courage of those who had fallen, and the hope of those yet to be born. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly what it needed.